All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. My name is Chris Alaimo.
And I'm Ben Gassaway. Together, we are the Amateur Investors.
This podcast is our open source journal of everything we learn about investing and wealth management.
We're here to explore the key concepts, market dynamics, and investing strategies that will assist you on the path toward financial independence and financial literacy. Our mission is to build us up from amateurs to experts.
All suggestions are our own, and we recommend that you do your own research before taking any investment advice. See you in this week's episode. We hope you enjoy it. Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Amateur Investors. We have a special guest here today. We've got John Vallis. He is the podcast host for Bitcoin Rapid Fire. He started his podcast back in August of 2019. He's a really big player in the space, and he's talked to a lot of people, big players in the space. So, John, thank you so much for coming on our podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's awesome to be here, guys. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Of course. All right, so we'll just get right into it. So obviously you're on a podcast called Bitcoin Rapid Fire. So how'd you get down the Bitcoin rabbit hole? What made you start podcasting about it? How'd you find out about it? What was kind of your touch points for getting to Bitcoin?
Long story short, I first heard about it because I think 2011, 12, my friend and I were interested in procuring some DMT at the time, and we heard about this place called the Silk Road, and of course we pussied out, and we didn't actually end up following through with it. But that was my first time I heard about it. Kind of forgot about it, and then in 13 I started paying attention again. I was listening to Andreas and his great videos at the time. Bots, didn't really know how to get some. You had to jump through hoops at the time. I bought some on a trip in Bali in 2014 because, I'd been wanting to get my hands on some and learn more about it. And then, it was kind of a variety of touch points over the next 2 years. And then I met Bobby Lee. I was living in Shanghai at the time, and he was fairly prolific in the space at that time. He was running one of the longest running exchanges, one of the biggest exchanges in China. Spoke with him a few times. And then in 2016, I really started going down the rabbit hole. And then it's kind of been a journey down the rabbit hole ever since. Like, I can't really identify a time when the penny dropped, but I mean, it feels like with each passing day. I mean, I'm working on an article right now, and I'm having a hard time articulating the thoughts I'm having, because I'll go on a run like I did this morning, and it's like this endless stream of epiphanies about this thing. And it's not overwhelming. It's great. But I guess the point is that it never really stops. And so I started the podcast in, as you said, fall of 19, because I had to speak to people about this. Prior to me finding Bitcoin Twitter, I just kind of thought, I knew there was other people involved in it, but you never interact with them in your daily life. You never meet anyone else who's interested in Bitcoin. So it was kind of like an isolated experience. And then I fell into Bitcoin Twitter somehow, realized there was a bunch of other people that were really into this stuff. And then, I just couldn't take it any longer. I had to speak with other people who were building the ecosystem, or experts or thinkers in the space, wanted to pick their brain, wanted to have a conversation with them to see if we could push both of our understandings forward. That's kind of the format of my shows. I like to try to have conversations rather than interviews. And it's been a very interesting ride since doing that.
Yeah. That's awesome. I didn't realize your journey had been so long. I think 2 points there. One, I cannot imagine how, like, just the amount of money that was sort of transacted in, things as small as like a fake license or a fake ID purchase. How much Bitcoin? I would love to see that stat in the early days of just buying things on the Silk Road, those types of things. How much value is transacted? And two, have you seen the movie The Arrival with Amy Adams?
I don't think so.
The alien movie. So basically, it's this movie where they're trying to understand this is a tangent, but I'll get to the point. They're trying to make sense of this alien language. It was their first contact, and the one point that Amy made was when you start to learn a new language, it almost shifts the fundamental way that you think about things. And spoiler alert, the way that the aliens think is they think about time in a non-linear fashion. So she started to see the future. And I noticed that when I started going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, I started thinking about everything like Bitcoin. I was starting to think Bitcoin. That run thing, I go on runs every single day, and I'm like, I find myself looking up in the sky thinking about, okay, well, what's going to happen? What's happening with the smart contract? I just start going down even just a mental rabbit hole about Bitcoin. You sort of take advantage of fundamentally what money is and all its implications, beyond even just the number go up technology. It can do so much. So
well, that's the rabbit hole. Money touches everything. It's a far more fascinating phenomenon than we give it credit for in modern culture. It's pretty much the centerpiece of all of our daily lives. It's what we're striving for the most. It's what we orient our life around. We have no discussion about its nature. It's really paradoxical sort of relationship that we have with it. But you're right. That's the rabbit hole. The rabbit hole is what money is. And it's really hard to nail down, but it's extremely fascinating, and it has wide-reaching implications and relevance to so many things. And that's why many people share your experience, where they say, once you pass the event horizon, you have these orange-colored glasses on. It's like the Matrix metaphor sort of thing. Like things just look different because you're looking at them through a vastly different lens. You're looking through the stand. You've adopted a Bitcoin standard, perhaps. And value and time preferences and all of that kind of stuff takes on a different character. And you begin to see, as you learn about all this stuff, the manifestations of unsound money in culture and society, and the manifestations of sound money in culture, society, and in human behavior. And you can kind of spot, like, this is why in the space, we have this slang term where we call things fiat, and it's a pejorative, basically, of saying that is a manifestation of unsound money. That is a institution, a structure, a behavior that is a manifestation or has been heavily influenced by unsound money. And so I feel you, man. It's a different world.
it is.
It really is, yeah. And it's crazy, like going down the rabbit hole. I mean, I remember getting in, and my story is kind of very different than yours, that I was listening to the Investors Podcast by Preston Pish and Stig Broderson, two pretty common figures in the investing space, especially in the podcasting. And I was listening to the Quarterly Masterminds, and in it, they, with Hari and Tobias Carlisle, normally what they do is they have everyone come on and they do a pick, whether it's a stock ticker or whatever. And Preston said in March of 2020, he was like, oh, Bitcoin. And I just kind of like scoffed at him, like, whatever. And then I was catching up on episodes, and it was in June. And then he said it again in June. And I had never heard anyone do another pick in, like, concurrent episodes. Like, yeah, like I think Stig said Google back in like 2016, and then again in 2018 or 2019. But it was like, he picked Bitcoin again, and I was like, crap, like I'm late. I need to figure out as much as I can about Bitcoin as fast as I can. So in June of 2020, I bought like, I think $1,000 worth of Bitcoin at the time, and the price was like $9,000, $10,000, something like that. And I really was like researching. I'm like, I'm so late to all of this, and then now I'm like dollar cost averaging in and buying whenever I can at 55,000, and now I feel like I'm still early. So it's crazy. Like I guess your time preference, and I know that's a big thing in the Bitcoin space. Having a long time preference compared to a short, or high time preference versus short time preference, and it just really opens your eyes to the whole space and everything. And in the Bitcoin, I know it's like 24/7. It's crypto, it's constantly moving and stuff, but it's just, you have more of a global view. You're always thinking about it, like, you're constantly learning, things are constantly happening, and it's, every day feels like a week because of how much happens in this space right now, especially currently with Tesla and all these companies thinking about investing in it, and the Bitcoin hybridization and stuff like that. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's a wave, man. It's a genuine sociocultural economic paradigm shift phenomenon, mashup of all those things. And I think we feel that's why we feel like it's so hard to keep up. That's why we feel like there's so much to learn. But it's sometimes, I mean, one of the things early on that I didn't allow myself to believe was that I could have stumbled upon or even exist in a time of such a paradigm shift. That's really saying something, because we live in a time of the internet and all sorts of technological advancements that have really changed the nature of our day-to-day lives. But I genuinely think that this thing is like an order of magnitude or more stranger than that in terms of its impact. And that's why it's so, all this strange stuff is happening. That's why it's so compelling, and that's why it's sucking people in, and that's why it's taking the mind share of everybody, whether you're for or against. And so it's a tremendous thing to be a part of. And as you said, it's so early. I mean, everyone who gets in thinks they're late, first of all. People that got in 2013, 14, 15, they're like, oh shoot, I missed it. Bitcoin was 20 cents a year ago. Oh shoot, I missed it. Bitcoin was $20, $200, $2,000, $20,000. That's just the nature of the beast. But I mean, we're at I would say, the bottom of the S curve for the adoption of this thing. And I think the next decade is going to be really, really, really interesting for Bitcoin. And it is by no means too late to get involved. But it's also like, every time I talk about it in financial terms, I feel like somewhat icky, because I'm not buying this thing to sell it for another financial asset. Mm-hmm. There may come a time in the future where I buy it to enjoy my life more, or on things that are meaningful, or to refine myself for some way, or to provide for people that I love. But like, this is a forever sort of thing in many ways, or at the very least, it's a very long-term thing. Like, and it's, I guess I feel icky because I feel that it's so much more than just another investment where I might be able to appreciate, gain some appreciation of my money. I think it's, to use a phrase from Terence McKenna, I think it's stranger than we can suppose. And so just, get it and hold on to it, and hodl, as they say, right? Hold on for dear life. It's going to be a wild ride.
Well, I think that's the point. I think where I'm trying to get to, and I think I'm still even in my early innings of my own maturation of just like thinking about the space, is I need to get more comfortable with, I have sort of the conviction that one Bitcoin is going to be worth 100 million Satoshis. That's the goal, right? Is that we're not talking about it in dollar terms, is we get to this, it is the denominator for all financial transactions. You for once in the world, other than, football internationally, soccer, we have very few things that kind of unite the world in some common term. But Bitcoin can be that place to do so. And you're right. I think there's this inkling to dollar chase, because you kind of look back and you're like, oh, I wish I bought it at this. I wish I bought it that. And then you could talk to the altcoins and the unit bias of like Dogecoin. Oh, well, what if it went up to $2? There's no way it's going to $2. And if it does, it shouldn't. So that's called opportunity cost. And I think a lot of folks are really thinking about it as sort of chasing the dollar. But the way that I think about it is, you talk to grandparents and they're like, oh, I used to go to movies for a nickel. Well, it's not that things got more expensive. Your dollars are just worth less. And that's the mind. I think that's the frame of mind that people are not, it's not clicking. It's just that their dollars are worth less. It's not that things are more expensive just because time and inflation. This inflation thing is fake. It's your dollars are just worth less because we're printing it like monopoly money. And Bitcoin has been like the only thing, like I've been saying this, is the Bitcoin protocol is sort of like the one law that's truly been followed since its existence. At all. You look at any stop sign, everyone runs them. But Bitcoin, the whole community is designed for veracity. And I think that's what's so fascinating. People are thinking about, well, what's it going to be worth? What's going to be worth? It's what can you preserve? What are you protected by? You now have something you can put value in and you get value out. That's the first time ever. You don't have to worry about Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, protecting your money. They go under, the government bails them. It's just, it's bringing responsibility to people, and it's bringing, just that's truly financial independence, is the authority to move value where you choose. And there's nowhere else to do that except for Bitcoin, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, this is an incorruptible truth around which society and economics and economic activity and behavior will orient itself almost naturally. The appeal of that mechanism is too great for economic actors to resist it ultimately, when every other option is corruptible. You can have it intermediated or stolen from you or debased and things of that nature. I mean, the value of having an incorruptible truth of the nature and character and attributes of Bitcoin, again, we go back to this not really being able to appreciate it. I mean, in hindsight, we will, and we'll probably listen to this conversation and be like, I can't believe you guys didn't see what this was going to be, but it's kind of hard to look 2 feet in front of your nose sort of thing. But yeah. And, in terms of talking to people, I mean, people need to be responsible for themselves, and content like this and the stuff that I do is hopefully helpful to those people in some way. But, with this latest altcoin run, a bunch of friends who I got into Bitcoin have hit me up and been like, I moved out and got into Ethereum. And, I just tell them like, so you're clearly chasing the dollar gains, right? Because for me, what I'm trying to do, my goal is to increase my nominal amount of Bitcoin over time. So selling Bitcoin into something else is counterproductive to that goal, right? But we live in a society and people are conditioned to do that, right? To make those quick changes so they can want to get an extra 10% there, an extra 50% there, chase the hot money, all that kind of stuff. And they don't seem to value the wisdom of people that came before them that said, hey, we've all been there. It's a mistake. You're very, very likely to get burned. Take the easy long-term approach. It's better on your mental health, and it's probably better on your financial health in the long term as well. But people don't like to hear it. Saying that Bitcoin is like a portal into another dimension where your life becomes increasingly inexpensive is not as sexy as saying that you can 10x your money in a month,
Yeah. And I think, with all the money printing going on with the Fed and stuff, I mean, you look at any asset class right now, aside from like bonds, but, even then when they were dropping interest rates, but aside from anything else, real estate's up, stocks are up, pretty much all stocks across the board, all cryptos are up.
It's the everything bubble.
Yeah. And you get to a point where, it's like the thing, everything's overvalued. I mean, we always talk about in our newsletter, like the Warren Buffett indicator. I know he's more traditional value investing, and we don't need to get into him and Charlie hating, Bitcoin. We disagree with him as well, even though we love them. But you get to a point where, Warren Buffett's like, there's crazy amounts of fear when you're looking at the Sharpe ratios and you're looking at all these different things. It's like, guys, like a lot more people should be more fearful. They're like, well, I just 10x my money on Doge. I just 10x my money on, AMC. I 14x my money on GameStop. Like, it's like, all right, like, this is when you get washed out, when the tide leaves, basically.
It's almost, for Bitcoiners in the bear market, nobody believes them. Like, oh, nobody, Bitcoin is dead. It's never going to become anything. And in the bull market, everyone, thinks they can beat the market or find something sexier or hotter that moves faster. And Bitcoiners are seen as like boring. Like, oh, your stuff only appreciates 100 or 200% a year. That's super boring. I'm never going to get rich that way. So it's funny. But look, I mean, most people have to learn the hard way. Like Doge is a perfect example. I mean, what is the market cap? Like 50-60 billion dollars at this point, possibly more.
I checked. It was 80, I think at its peak it was like 86 billion, but it's fallen to like 55 or like 49.
And it's a joke coin with no development, with an infinite supply. I mean, it is a joke. It's a hilarious commentary on our society and culture today and the state of our, the economic state that we're in.
And it's the number 4 coin in cryptos right now.
I know it's madness. It's madness. But we are in incredibly mad times. I kind of hate to say that, but there's a lot of irrational behavior going on right now, and I love to kind of stir the pot when I'm out socially, and I say that like I see bubbles everywhere. There's so much frothiness. There's so much debt in the system. There's so much money printing. The axe has to drop at some point. Like something has to give. And I don't know if that's now or 10 years from now, but I say as a result of that, I take an extremely conservative approach to my wealth. And as a result, I put it all in Bitcoin because there's no more conservative place to store your wealth than Bitcoin. And of course, everyone's like, that's the most conservative play. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
It's super risky. So it's strange times, but that's the opportunity, and that's what keeps it all exciting. I mean, it's quite a time to be alive and see all this unfold.
Yeah, and it's tough because, again, Chris and I, tongue in cheek, we're the amateur investors. Thus, we are amateur investors. So we came into this out of college trying to learn, and we took the value investing approach, how to build out discount cash flow models, the whole 9 yards, weighted average cost of capital. As I'm digging into this and I'm learning about Bitcoin, none of these valuations make sense.
All your models are destroyed.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything I learned is built upon a splintered floorboard. So my base is kind of collapsing. So I'm getting to that mindset where I'm thinking about Bitcoin, or I've come to the realization that Bitcoin is, like you said, it's not risky, because there has to be a repricing of assets that are valued against nothing. I mean, we have the unprofitable, I think it's like the unprofitable tech index is up like 300% on the year. So you don't even need to make profit. Cash flows don't matter. Like, the intent of shares and buying equity in a company is, that you spin off those cash flows, you bring back value via dividend, price appreciation. If the money doesn't exist, why is the stock going up? Eventually, there has to be a reversion to the mean. There is always a reversion to the mean 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. But Bitcoin will inevitably only go up as people seek yield and assets are repriced. And if it comes to the point where Bitcoin is the repricing catalyst, which I firmly believe it is, because it is the measurement that is fixed and everyone can look at it if you have an internet connection, you can measure financial truth. And I think that's fascinating. I don't think it's clicking with people because there's never been anything like it. And I think we're on the precipice of something new. And that's pretty exciting, is no one knows the answer. I think we've come to the answer, but what that looks like is yet to be seen, which I'm pretty excited about.
Totally agree. And, they say that Bitcoin is not the bubble, it's the pin. And I think it's unavoidable that the gravity of the pressure that Bitcoin is putting on the legacy system in terms of the truth in terms of a measure that it represents, is probably going to put additional pressure on the existing system. And who knows how this is all going to play out, but just on a principled fundamental level, like, you can't create something of value out of nothing, for no risk and no cost. And we have an entire globe predicated on that principle right now of printing money, and and all the malinvestment that implies, that a supermarket entity gets to siphon off the wealth of all the productive players in a market and impose what they believe to be the proper allocations of that capital, instead of the market doing that. And it's reached such an insane scale that systems break down at a certain point. And I don't know, like, who knows where we are in that. I almost feel like, after 2008, people thought like, oh shit, things are falling apart now. And then they got pieced back together in a sense. None of the problems were fixed, but life went on. And now people are kind of saying like, yeah, it's going to take 10 or 15 years for real change to happen. But I think we're in for a wilder ride than that. I mean, there are examples of places in the past, be it Venezuela or Weimar, et cetera, where, this same thing happens, albeit on a more acute or smaller scale. And there's a lot of parallels to be drawn, to, the everything bubble, asset prices everywhere going up, people feeling like they're getting rich, people spending because they feel that way. And then they realize that it's kind of all a facade. It wasn't real. And then, of course, you have the unavoidable aspect of the inequality divide getting bigger as a result of these policies.
100%.
I mean, it's absolutely insane that, central bankers around the world don't acknowledge, I don't expect them to acknowledge, but it shows either their incompetence or their morality for not acknowledging the central role of central banks in exacerbating inequality and not allowing the market to do its thing in finding equilibrium between, supply and demand of all participants in a market. So I can't wait for the world where no one can corrupt the measure stick, the mechanism for coordinating economic activity, because then we get a far fairer world, and people are judged and rewarded on the merit of their work and on the strength of their character. And that's how I think it should be. And there's no supermarket entity imposing their, morality or what their values on other people. So, but I think
and financial decisions have to be become intentional, because you're not playing with play money at that point. You're playing with a supply that is firmly existed. And I've talked to Chris about this. Like, what if we had a social media where you only had 5 likes a day? You know, would Kim Kardashian get 100 million likes on her picture? Probably not. So with a scarcity of something, you must become intentional. You must become tactical. Otherwise, there will be consequences.
Be disciplined. Yeah, exactly. Yes. I mean, there's actual risk. I mean, the whole world, you know, as far as governments and central banks right now are operating, is they get to act without consideration for risk, you know, and they get to, you know, they get to spread the risk around into the markets, and they get to feed off of the rewards. I mean, it's completely insane. I mean, we will, very strong. I very strongly believe that through the lens of history, be it 20 or 50 or 100 years from now, we will look back on this time, not in a dissimilar way that we look back on the Dark Ages in Europe. And we, like, if I was to say to you, think of the Dark Ages, you would think of like this probably downtrodden lady carrying her bread basket, you know, dirt on her face, into her little, like, you know, mud hut or stone thing, like outside the castle wall, or something like that. And you think like, oh man, what a bad time, melancholy. They were depressed. It was kind of like it's called the Dark Ages for a reason, right? I think the influence of central banking and of unsound, corrupt, deceitful money, and the society and culture it created, the line will be far more easily and directly drawn through the lens of history, and people will look back on this history and say, how did they tolerate it? How come they didn't know? How could they not see how much this influenced and deteriorated and negatively impacted their society and culture? How did they not see that?
And it's easy to correlate, you know, 100, 1,000 years later. I think you're right. We'll look back and we'll see authoritarian regimes, even genocides, just these horrible atrocities that the folks with the money and the manipulation and the power to do so move the needle. And I think being able to store and retain value and transact value in a decentralized, autonomous, also anonymous way, sort of, I think gives power back to the people. It's going to be incredible what the implications really were. I agree.
Well, you respect the sovereign choices of each individual when you have a money that can't be corrupted. I mean, that's the point. And the information that they convey and communicate to the market is pristine. It is a pristine manifestation of their will and their actions. And then you have to let the cards, you let the market do what the market does, right? It finds equilibrium, and it interprets that information to an emergent property for managing the best outcomes, right? But the point is not so much the outcome. And we've kind of come into a culture where, because of this power over the creation of money, we think we can manage outcomes. We think we can de-risk the entire world. But in fact, in doing that, we're just pushing the risk to, you know, effectively to the core. And I think it's ultimately going to come home to roost in a very dramatic fashion. But that is such a fundamental aspect of this, is that the money is an emblem of your time and your sacrifice and your will. It's how you communicate who you are and what you want to other people in a market. And for an entity to be able to corrupt that relationship, to be able to distort that information, is an infringement on your fundamental sovereignty of who you are. You know, that you can't communicate with high fidelity your very essence to the people that you're interacting with economically. And that, I think, will be seen through the lens of history as one of the most egregious elements of this whole central banking money printing, you know, charade.
Yeah. And, you know, I always love Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger's quotes. It's funny that they match up well with Bitcoin while they don't get it. I get that they're about the long play too, and the long time.
Dude, they're like 100, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
it's hard for them.
They shouldn't even be commenting on it.
Yeah. But like, it's funny. Like my favorite
agree.
quotes by Charlie Munger is show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcomes. And that's literally what we're witnessing. And I like to consider the three of us very fortunate, you know, where we were born. You know, the odds of us being born are astronomical alone, but just being born in the United States, you know, the United States and China are going to be the last ones not to adopt this. I think people are going to chase the gains, like in any market. But, you know, you look at exactly like what you said, countries like Nigeria, like India, like Venezuela, like Colombia right now, you know, in the last 72 hours, their government is killing its own citizens as they protest a lot of the egregious tax hikes that they're doing on the middle and lower class that are going to be, greatly adversely affected. And, we're witnessing this in real time. And, we're lucky that our currency is stable. We've just printed 40% of it that's ever been created in the last, 14 months. But, we're lucky that we're more secure in a way than these other countries that their currencies are hyperinflating away. Like, we are very fortunate that there isn't as bad. Not saying we're not going to get there. We're definitely are. It's just
we're relatively fortunate for sure.
It's convenient for the time being.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, again, in history, they'll just say, well, they had it bad and they had it a little worse, but they were under the same regime ultimately. Yeah. And, so it's almost impossible to be really into Bitcoin and what it represents without being kind of like quasi-revolutionary sort of political movement oriented. And not that you attach yourself to a collective movement. The movement is literally taking sovereignty back into where, the locus of sovereignty is the individual. That's what it's all about. It's about, I guess, freeing yourself of the things that rob you of your sovereignty and that inhibit your ability to communicate, economically speaking, to the market effectively. And then, of course, there's all sorts of follow-on effects of robbing them of that ability, and the size of governments and what governments do. And as you've mentioned, militaries and all this kind of stuff. I mean, all that will be on the chopping block to some extent when this is fully played out. And I think what we'll get is a world that's far more in line with the freedom that people desire, rather than the one that they're kind of allowed to have, or the one that they're offered.
Yeah, and I'm probably oversimplifying it, but the way that I kind of think about a Bitcoin economy is financial sort of like democracy, where every every Bitcoin is a vote towards something. It doesn't, I don't know what it could mean anything. It could mean you buy resources, you're storing value, but it is a scarce vote towards your belief in something. It is, you're assigning value to your conviction in something, whether it's for immediate need, that's your time preference. You're assigning value to your time preference. And that could be bread. It could be to buy a house. It is a true vote towards your conviction. Whereas the Fed, they are just running a recursive Python loop where they're just entering value into the system. They control the votes, and the people will never get to vote for the candidate that they want to win, because the Fed is just printing votes. And that's how I think about the printing system. It's corrupted democracy. It's regardless of your political views, that's what's happening. They control the votes. You don't get to vote. So that's
spending is the real vote. Like, what's the real vote? Once every 4 years, where you get to pick between A or B, or every single day when you deploy your capital, which, as you say, is an emblem of the sacrifices you've made, the work you've done, the deployment of the energy and time that is under your dominion. And you do that when you buy bubblegum, when you buy bread, when you travel somewhere. That is all you communicating to the world. This is how I want the world to be. That's what your spending is. And that is the most powerful vote that there is. And with everyone doing that with full fidelity, then we'll get the world that we all, through our actions, not through our words, determine that is the world we want to be. And then if we look and say, hey, this world actually isn't so good, then we know that the way to change it is through changing ourselves, is through changing our behavior. But when there's so many layers of obscurity and imbalances in how the world that we contend with is actually constructed, it's no wonder that people check out and say, well, what the fuck does my behavior matter? What does my actions matter? What's my voice matter? It matters for nothing. Like, it's going to go on the way it is anyways. None of this is, I don't condone, or I don't participate in any of the, this. And like, to a degree, they're wrong, because there's some element of their involvement, but I hear what they're saying, because even if you don't consciously see that relationship, people just get a sense like that world out there is not one that I feel like I either am contributing to or want to be contributing to. But in a sense, I'm forced, because I don't have full control and dominion over my quote unquote votes. That is my money, my sovereignty, the way I communicate to the market.
That was perfectly said. John, seriously, this has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to do so. I think we'll probably start sort of some of the wrap-up questions here, but I have one, I guess, last pre-wrap-up question. Is there anything in, Bitcoin's development, any of the add-ons, anything in Lightning, or just Bitcoin, sort of the on-chain development or rather an aspect of Bitcoin that you're kind of studying independently that you're really fascinated about right now? And could you kind of share that with our audience of where your mind's kind of focused on with Bitcoin right now?
Yeah, like I kind of take the view, like if Bitcoin didn't change at all from here on, I think it still has a long way to run. I mean, it's still a phenomenal thing. But I am really interested in what's going on in the Lightning Network. I think there's going to be like a Cambrian explosion of innovation and stuff built on, if not the Lightning Network, perhaps another layer, but it's seeming like a lot of stuff is happening on Lightning. What it means for kind of like a encrypted internet sort of thing. I mean, I don't know how familiar you guys are with things like Sphinx or Breeze and that kind of stuff, where, you know, podcasting and communications generally, like chat and stuff like that. I mean, this is moving to platforms that cannot be censored, and they're where there's an economic incentive built into them. And in fact, the economic element is part of their ability to resist the censors. It's also an ability for people that provide, let's say, digital value. So content creators of various kinds can actually be rewarded very easily, and in many cases automatically. So, and that it's obviously super early days, and this is all very nascent. Not very many people are even aware of this kind of stuff. But in an era where the attempt to control people's behavior ultimately, because as things kind of get unwind more and become more out of control, unfortunately the problem won't be properly diagnosed, and the powers that be, the people with all the power and influence, will say, hey, things are getting more and more out of our control. That means we need to institute more and more control, right? In fact it's it is their imposition of the control that they conceive that is causing the imbalances and the chaos that they're ostensibly responding to. But nevertheless, we live in a time where I think there's going to be more and more control. And I think the last year is a very good example of how that can play out. And so there's going to be more demand for things that circumvent that, to allow people to express themselves as they see fit, whether that be economically through their spending through sound money, or whether that be communicating with other like-minded individuals all over the world in a way that can't be stopped and it can't be spied on. And so that's what's really interesting. It all comes back, this might sound somewhat cheesy to some, but I mean, it does all come back to freedom. And as you said, I mean, we're relatively privileged to have grown up in the places that we have that are relatively stable and they're relatively free. But again, I think we will look back on this period, and even the degree to which we think we are free, the history books will probably take issue with our characterization of that. And so anything that allows an individual to express themselves the way they want to express themselves with the people that they want to interact with, of course, without directly or intentionally harming someone else, I'm for that stuff. And it seems like most people are as well. And as the technologies emerge to permit that, they're being built and they're being adopted. And I'm hoping that's going to what's going to move us into that future that's going to judge our current situation so harshly.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast recently, and it was something very interesting was said. It was a Bitcoin podcast, and I'm drawing a blank on which one it was, but someone was saying in a few years' time, it'll be seen anything that is free, YouTube, Google, Facebook, whatever it may be, these technologies, anything that's considered free is going to be considered as dangerous. And like, he was basically describing exactly what you're saying. Like, it's not free. Like, you're the product. Like, and yeah. We all kind of know that. We you sign up for Facebook, you use it to sign up for things or I've since I've been deleting things on Facebook and stuff, but trying to fully deleverage myself from the Facebook world slowly and steadily. But, like, it's seen as a risk because like you're the product that's being sold, and like they have the ability to control you with that. That's the perfect example of it.
Yeah, I think it's a really important space. And I think maybe tangentially related are sort of these micropayments. Is this kind of what you're talking about? Maybe the micropayments, kind of like real-time streaming of value. I think that is something that I'm hugely fascinated with, that Bitcoin can enable with its divisibility, which, can programmatically get even more fine. But you can really provide value in places that would otherwise have just slipped through the cracks. I think subscription services, in my opinion, are sort of like the crack of just like wasted use cases where, I'll watch what am I watching on Netflix? Nothing, but I have a Netflix subscription, $10 a month. But if I was paying for my use, then you really get an idea of the incentivization and the utility rate of certain platforms. You get locked into these things and these X per month. I don't pay for my gas to my Kia by month. I pay per gallon, which maybe they're messing up the tank measurements and it could, whatever. But at the same time, you're paying for use. And I think there's a lot of spaces where you don't pay for use. And there's also people who are doing things for free, like me and Chris. Like we do this podcast. We don't have a big enough user base, like 1 million users, we can finally start getting paid. But I think it's a fascinating where you kind of incentivize, even on the smallest scale. I think it just unlocks creativity, community, and just like freedom of speech to have sort of an incentive to speak your mind and create as you wish. I agree.
Absolutely. I mean, it welcomes more things into the domain of the market that people can exchange. I mean, there's so many impediments, be they cost or time, to the transfer of money now that negates a lot of things from being on the market, either because it's too expensive to transact things of such little value, or the time to do so makes it not worthwhile in some way. So when you have the ability to effectively stream money, so that's what Sphinx allows you to do, that with podcasts, right? You say I'll every minute it's 10 sats or something like that. When you have that ability, you bring so much economic activity online. You dramatically expand the scope of what can be brought into the market, assigned a value, and exchanged with people who value it. And so, again, tip of the iceberg. Like the streaming money is going to be a phenomenon, and it's going to radically transform how things work. I mean, think about how siloed everything in the world is today. If I want to send $50 to someone in Amsterdam, like, in most cases, and most people will still use like a wire transfer, 4 days, $40. I mean, it's absolutely absurd.
Yeah, through Western Union and all that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and yet Western Union takes a massive percentage. Now, the more savvy among us might use TransferWise, right? And that's a bit faster and it's a bit cheaper and stuff, but it's still also siloed and archaic. It's not speaking to each other. But when you have the power of a global open network that can, transact at the speed of light effectively in denominations as small as, as small as you need, then everything comes online. Like, so much more value and so much more activity comes online. And, it's going to be amazing to see unfold.
Yeah. And I'll ask my wrap up question soon, but, you even think about just like the upstart limitations of even like just large scale companies talking about foreign exchange risk, talking about just like even the complexity of running financial models in companies that operate across borders. There's a complexity that doesn't need to be there. And we're just confusing a world that's already implementing global trade. Why don't we have a global money? It exists, but people are they're not ready to do it yet. And that's okay. Look, it'll take time.
It is okay, and it's wonderful because it's our opportunity, right? The asymmetry of information is our opportunity. And, I'm kind of on the side of long may it continue. When I see all this Doge stuff and I see everyone talking about other stuff, like, unless it's the people I love, where I really want them to like do well. Otherwise, I'm like, I'm okay with cheap Bitcoin. Like, I'm totally fine with that. So
just keep stacking.
Yeah, exactly. Because, I think it's going to get out of reach for a lot. It's never going to be out of reach, but like, the train is leaving the station, and the longer you wait, I think the less it will be a force to amplify the things that you want to do in your life. And ultimately that's what this is all about, right? Like, I don't want to be rich just so I can say that I'm rich, for example. I want to do things. I want to use it as a mechanism and a tool to amplify the things that I find meaningful in my life, and the things I want to achieve and do. So, it's very, very, very interesting. And there's so many rent seekers around the world, and there's so many institutions that need not exist and who won't exist once this is fully adopted and underway. I mean, just think about the Forex market alone. I mean, we're talking about trillions of dollars a day in transaction volume, and the fees of the banking infrastructure all around the world, and the footprint of the banking institutions all over the world. I mean, there is so much unnecessary waste in the system of money globally today. And to have all that collapse into a system of perfect efficiency and openness and availability and fairness to everyone, it's staggering.
The time is coming, honestly, and the train is chugging. We just got to figure out which car we're getting in, honestly. So, John, this has been a blast chatting with you. This is one question I always like to ask our audience is, what has been the biggest investing mistake of your career? And that could be along your journey of Bitcoin. It could be, with traditional assets. But I'd love to hear that stumbling block and, things we can learn from.
Biggest mistake. Oh, oh man, it hurts me to say this one, but I prior to Bitcoin, I was a gold bug, right?
Really?
So yeah, in around 2005, 6, read all the books. Oh my God, financial system is fucked, and then especially with 2008, being like, oh my God, it's really actually happening. And I in 2017, before I became, truly orange pilled obsessed with Bitcoin, right? I remember having accumulated some Bitcoin that year, and obviously it had done well. And I was like, well, I should rebalance into my gold, right? To have a properly balanced sort of thing going on. So I did. And oh man, it hurts because gold has been a dog for a decade, especially relative to Bitcoin. But and shortly thereafter, I wised up and I never made that mistake again. But Bitcoin was a lot more expensive after having made that mistake. So that was a bad trade, and that was me. I mean, I don't want to be too harsh on myself because we are dealing with like, a paradigm shift here, but not thinking from first principles about what this really was, and not fully appreciating what it represented quite yet. So that one stung. What about you guys? What about each of your mistakes?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Mine. Oh, I do know mine. Nikola. So the company that was tied with Tesla. Everything was going up. I got all into the hype. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to put I only put like $500, a couple $100 on it. And I watched it go from I got in at like $69 and then it fell down to like 41. I'm like, oh no, it'll be fine. Then it fell down to like 35 or 35, 31. And I finally sold off, but I lost like half my money just by,
Is it still a company?
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
They're going through a bunch of problems, and their stock price is like $9. So I got out ahead of taking it all the way down. But basically, I just kind of got really excited. I'm like, they're paired with Tesla, and then I kind of looked into. I left my fundamentals and I just got in with the hype. And it was a good lesson to get burned on of like, yeah, like they're paired with it, and then like this CEO is like a fraudster. I actually I won't call anyone out, but it was such a hype train and a media thing of like we're with Tesla, and then they're like they're really not. So.
But if I could piggyback on that for a sec, the beautiful thing about Bitcoin, and this may not play super well with your audience given, the kind of stuff you discussed, but I want to live my life, and I want my focus and attention to be on the things that are like maximally meaningful to me. Mm-hmm. And it's such a blessing to not have to think not have to be trading and moving things around and managing and considering my portfolio all the time, just to know that my savings are being funneled into the best form of money we've ever known. And, the base layer of the coming civilization, if I was to characterize it, and it's doing that automatically. And I'm just going to go ahead and live my life and enjoy the sovereignty that provides and the control over my life that permits. And I'm going to focus on other stuff because, like I said before, at the end of the day, all this is just so that we can live the lives that we want to live more, live more of those lives. And I think we often fall into these pursuits being ends in themselves. Well, the end is to have my portfolio be worth X amount of dollars at the end of the year or the end of the decade or whatever. And I love not having that as something that kind of pollutes my headspace, where I can focus on what's meaningful and important and let that believe in the thesis and let that do its thing.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely come around to it with Bitcoin. So, I still do have equities, which a bunch of them are in like 401ks and stuff. So converting them over has been a pain, but I've, all of my excess money I've put into Bitcoin, and I've been very happy with that decision basically.
Yeah, I think I don't think I have like this like dastardly sort of like investment mistake. I feel like I've been pretty lucky along the journey, but my early mistakes were small money, obviously. Like I feel like the way that I approached investing has been really oddly conservative. I feel like there was a chance just being surrounded by people downloading Robinhood and doing call and put options immediately. I never really got into that. I think my biggest mistake was thinking I was an investor when I did 0 minutes of research and just start buying things thinking I'm number one stock trader. And I think that's what's coming into play with Bitcoin as well, is people are looking at the price target. Oh, what they're, you can even see people's Google search, what is Bitcoin worth in 5-10 years? That's not the question. The question should be, what is Bitcoin and why is it so important in my life? What does it do? What is money? And until people ask that questions, you've done no research. And I think that has been my biggest investment mistake, is not doing research, trying to understand why am I buying this thing? And I think that was my biggest mistake. Just to answer that question.
That's a great point. And all this Robinhood stuff and the Doge stuff and all this stuff, it's so much speaks to the hyper financialization that we're experiencing right now, because of, I think, the stage we're in the destruction of the money. I mean, again, you reference these other periods, and that they didn't have Robinhood, but there was the same sort of behavior around financial instruments and investing. Like everyone thought, I'm an investor, and I'm going to, invest my money because there's so many gains to be made. And now with the advent of technology, everyone can do it sitting on their couch watching Netflix. They can be trading stocks and doing all this stuff. And I really think a lot of that is a manifestation of just how hyper financialized the system has become. And I think a lot of it will go away once we see the change that we've been discussing. And there'll be, investing won't go away, of course, but there will be it would be a very different landscape when you're comparing it against a sound money like Bitcoin, when there's a real kind of like risk-free rate, which is, let's say, the appreciation of the money on an annual basis to reflect the increase in productivity of a market, right? Like that'll be, that'll be the savings rate. That'll be what it is to hold your money. And if you want to push yourself out on the risk spectrum, well, there's going to be a higher hurdle for people looking to get your money to do that. And I think the options will be better, but there won't be such a necessity to push yourself out on the risk spectrum just to tread water, just to keep pace with the inflation of education and with commodities inflation, and which with the increasing expensiveness of your life, right? And I think that's part of why everyone's out on the risk spectrum, is because yes, the gains, but also if you're a retirement fund or state sponsored or otherwise, like you can't just save cash, right? You can't, and you can't even just save bonds, because that's not going to pay the bills for you, 5-10 years from now. Like you got to go out on that risk spectrum. And I think that's ultimately not healthy. And I think a lot of that will go away. And I think we'll have sounder investment practices in the future. And I think it'll be the purview of people who really, spend the time to know what they're doing, and to help perhaps people make those decisions, because most people will be fine with just saving their money. And if you want to go out on the spectrum, then, maybe the landscape of doing that will be different, I think is what I'm trying to say. So I don't know how, I fear that a lot of these people that are getting in to, well, as you said, all these people that think they're hotshot investors on Robinhood, I don't think that story ends well. I can't really conceive of a scenario where that ends well for those people, but maybe they'll learn a hard lesson, and it'll, help shape their behavior moving forward. But it's a very, very strange times we're living in. So it's great that you guys are having these conversations and talking about these issues and helping people frame their perspective around how they should be thinking about this kind of stuff. Because, protecting yourself in times like these is of paramount importance, because first of all, obviously nobody's going to do it for you. And the enemies are at the gates in terms of preserving wealth and capital. And, the fact that, we're all wrapped up in this thing and trying to help people figure out what this is so they can make more informed decisions is awesome. So I commend you guys for doing it.
Yeah,
Thank you, John.
And thank you. I appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people that use Robinhood typically skew younger in age, probably closer to us in their 20s, maybe early 30s latest. And, I didn't even really, well, I did kind of get burned by Robinhood, but I made it out okay, basically. So when I first getting into like Bitcoin back in June of 2020, so last summer, I bought like $1,000 worth on Robinhood. And then I got lucky that the price had fallen down, and I was kind of doing research on hardware wallets and hot wallets and cold wallets and all this. And I'm like, there's no way for me to withdraw this. So why would I ever want to keep this on this platform when there's these other chains being built? So I got lucky that the price had fallen and people were like bummed. And I was like, this is my opportunity. I can withdraw it and then buy it on, I bought it on Coinbase. So I went from one bad thing to another bad thing. But, you know, I kind of made the mistake of going from Robinhood to Coinbase. And then now I use other platforms for buying it, like Swan. We're big fans of Swan and stuff. That's kind of my main platform.
Yeah,
but
we got a great crew over there.
Yeah. And I was able to, you know, basically go from what was mistakes. And then I got really lucky that I had withdrawn all my money off Robinhood. And then come this January or February, whenever it was, when the GameStop thing occurred, I'm like, wow, like I got out unscathed, but I need to tell everyone. And Ben and I were like, you need to get out of it. Like Robinhood's not your friend. Like they're not, like they don't treat you like a customer. You don't treat customers like that, restricting trades.
No brokerage is your friend.
Things.
Don't forget that.
But yeah.
No brokerage is your friend.
Yeah, really. I mean, they're there to make you broker. But like basically what had, you know, I was able to move through and be okay. But kind of going back to what you were saying, John, like I hope people, like, you don't want to see anyone get hurt, but you know, through pain, you can learn. And like, yeah. I hope no one loses all their money or loses any money at all. But you know, if you get hurt and you're young, it's a lot better than if someone is in their 50s or 60s or 70s and getting hurt, if that makes sense.
Well, of course. You know, you got time to lick your wounds.
Exactly. So yeah, my last question before we do the final wrap up is, what's your favorite book, podcast, YouTube channel, or website? You could mention yours, or we'll give you the opportunity to do that. We see you have The Sovereign Individual behind your right shoulder.
Yeah, that's probably a good one. Anyone who hasn't read that, I mean, extremely prescient, written in 97, and describes pretty much everything that's going on today, from economics to politics to culture, all that kind of stuff. So, and, you know, the basis of a thesis that I think Bitcoin really helps facilitate. So that's a great book. Podcast.
You could say it could be one thing, it could be multiple.
Okay. Well, I've been doing, I haven't been listening to that much stuff recently. I've been trying to go narrow into certain domains. So I've been, I read Jordan Peterson's book, Maps of Meaning, a few months back. And, you know, as weird as it might sound, I think there are a lot of parallels between Bitcoin and the themes that he explores in that book. So that's what I've been chewing on. And it's a phenomenal book for anyone who's interested in, you know, the philosophy and psychology of the religious stories and myths, and, you know, pretty deep, dense stuff. But if that's your type of mind, then you might enjoy it. But that's where I've been hanging out lately, in the book domain.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if he's a Bitcoiner yet. I know that he's been on Twitter, and I know he's kind of overcoming a couple health concerns, but I know he's starting to dabble, and people are starting to talk to him about it. I just don't know if he owns any Bitcoin personally now.
I think he will soon.
All right, you might know more than me.
John, once again, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. If anyone in our audience wants to learn a little bit more about you or your podcast, where would you send them?
The podcast is called Bitcoin Rapid Fire, so it's on all the normal places and on YouTube as well. And the easiest place to interact with me is on Twitter. My handle is John K. Vallis. And yeah, guys, like I said, I really appreciate the invite. Great to meet you guys and talk. And I love what you guys are doing, so keep it up.
Thank you, John. It was awesome to have you here.
Thanks, John, so much. As everyone knows, you could rate and review our podcast, like it on YouTube, all the normal places on social media. So we'll catch you later. Have a good one.
See you guys.